Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dissecting Liberty podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Cotton.
Howdy.
And today we have on, for the third time, the Politicrat.
I guess you can't get any better guess.
Yeah, man. No, we enjoyed talking to you.
All right.
So, apparently, recently, you have changed your mind about private policing and how that could work.
I have.
In our current society.
I very much have.
So we're going to talk about that.
All right. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, so
talk about.
But yeah, let's first get into current events. I mean, obviously we have a bunch of civil unrest right now, and a lot of that has to do with people kind of becoming more aware of police brutality, especially when it comes like in terms of like the racial aspect. You have BLM out there marching and talking about how how black people have a more difficult time in this country, and especially when it comes to how they're treated by police.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's really something you could even argue. I mean, I've seen people, for instance, on social media trying to downplay how much of a racial factor that it is. But I mean, for instance, like black people, they are disproportionately victims of police brutality. And regardless of whether or not it is inherently racially motivated, or if it just so happens to be that black communities are like usually lower economic status, and usually crime is higher in those areas. I don't think it matters either way, but the truth is that black people are disproportionately the victims of police brutality, and I think that needs to stop. I mean, I think there is a big racial aspect to it, though, especially in like big cities, and
yeah, and like I would definitely agree with that. I definitely think that they do get targeted more, and whatever the reason, to me it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, all that matters is that they're disproportionately higher in terms of like the victim rate, like as opposed to people who are white. And I do think that has to do with the disparities between like minorities who are generally of lower socioeconomic status as opposed to whites. So yeah, I think that that's a big factor in that.
Yeah, and like I tend to think, like I guess I think of things in a very like individualist sense.
Exactly. Like for instance, I think that regardless of who is the victim of police brutality, it is all equally bad. However, it is also very nefarious that it happens to be racially motivated a lot as well. But yeah, I get what you mean, kind of like more of like the consequence being more important as opposed to necessarily the motivation.
Well, I think like there are a couple things to take into account, like like the average conservative response is there's more crime in black neighborhoods, right?
But yeah, that has nothing to do with the racial aspect. It has to do with, I think, the economic.
Exactly. Yeah. Like ask yourself why there's more crime in those neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Like ask yourself why George Floyd had, quote, allegedly had like a counterfeit $20 bill. He just got laid off,
Exactly. And I think it's all linked to what's going on. Even like the rioting, for instance. I'm not talking about the peaceful protests. I'm talking about the rioting. Because I was actually talking to a psychiatrist yesterday, and I was asking what her take on it in terms of maybe like the link to mental health, that sort of thing. And she told me that, well, of course, of course, the rioters they are most certainly motivated to go out because of the George Floyd thing. Like there is no denying that, or at least a good many of them are. However, she said that the rioting probably wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the COVID that were going on, because
Yeah.
people have just had so much anxiety and have just been so kind of repressed, haven't had anything to do, and it's almost like they're using that as a pretense to go out and kind of take that anger out. So of course the anger was triggered by the George Floyd thing, or the George Floyd murder. I don't want to call it a thing. Um,
Right.
but there definitely was, that was what triggered them, like the last straw, horse on the camel's back, to go out and kind of take out all that vented up rage from like not having access to society, essentially. And then when you think of the whole, like there was a whole debate about whether we should open the economy, whether we should keep the economy closed. And the stupid thing is that became a partisan issue, because whatever position one side takes, the other side takes the opposite.
Yep.
And a lot of nuance to it, because the truth is, like during the whole COVID thing, suicides were on the rise. And
Yeah.
I know exactly, I know exactly what it's like to not be able to work. Because when I am not working, personally, this is for me, I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I assume a lot of people are like this as well. Not like, for the sake of my mental health, I need to be working, because it gives me something to do. And when I'm not working, I've noticed I tend to gravitate towards more destructive behaviors. And by that, I don't mean drugs or anything. I mean like prank calling the government and stuff. Yeah. But no, just stuff, just kind of getting into shenanigans that probably I should be avoiding. But yeah, I'm going off topic, I think. So, but
Right.
yeah, I do think that there are a lot of things that are playing into this. If COVID never happened and there was no lockdown, I think that all of the protests would have been peaceful, or at least for the most part.
Yeah, I definitely do think that the COVID, like, having people cooped up and anxious, definitely played. It may have played like the biggest factor in all of this in terms of how the protest turned violent. But I mean, I don't know how aware or how much you watched kind of what was happening, but uh, are you aware? Like, did you see all the pallets of bricks that would randomly show up in these urban areas where the protests were scheduled to be held, and then you had these cops
Yeah,
specifically.
that's because there were a lot of people that were coming out of town to go to those protests. And I think that, or not the protests, to do the riots. Like, I mean, it's fine that like people would come out of town to do the protests, but then didn't we actually, I actually heard, and I don't know how true this is or not. I remember reading in, I forget what honestly, I think it was the New York Times. So I don't, I don't think it was an op-ed though. And
Triggered.
sometimes I like to give the mainstream media the benefit of the doubt, and I will in this case. But I heard that there were both white nationalists and black bloc anarchists who are coming into town to take part in that whole thing, to use as a pretense to essentially, I don't
See,
know.
I have
I
I have
saw
an issue with that. I have my issue is like the black bloc anarchists, like
the Antifa.
Antifa, right? Like, okay, you see them. They're obviously not anarchists, but that's a soapbox for another day. But like the white supremacist thing is what I really have the problem with. It's like, because if there were
That
white supremacists there, you'd think you would see them. You know what I mean? With everybody recording the entire thing, like everybody's so quick to get their phone out and record nowadays. You'd think you'd see like somebody walking around with a tiki torch or some shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know what you mean. I mean, however, I do think that what I don't get is all of the outrage on the right for Black Lives Matter. Like, I
Yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
Okay, and I also think we need to differentiate between the movement and the organization, because I mean there are some radical parts of the organization. I think there are radical aspects of pretty much every organization, because organizations like that tend not to be monoliths. Um,
Right.
I think that the ethos of what the movement stands for, which a lot of people who are in the organization follow the ethos of, is inherently good in terms of its motivation. And the one problem is that it just, I don't know, it just seems like a lot of people on the right get unnecessarily outraged about that. Like, I don't know where that comes from, because it's not like they're a bunch of like communists who or terrorists who go around destroying stuff. Yet I've heard them characterized like that, and it just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah, like that's my issue with how right wing people and left wing people to a certain degree portray organizations like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. You know, like they're not a real thing. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, and Antifa, for
Loose
instance,
collection of nothings. You know,
yeah,
they're not an
Mhm.
organized thing like Fox News says. Like Fox News paints it in a negative light, and then MSNBC paints it in a positive light. But they're
no,
wrong
I don't think
thing.
MSNBC paints
You
them
know?
in a positive light. They just act like, oh yeah, we understand. So it's more so covering for them as opposed to
Yeah,
supporting
excuse
them.
Yeah,
making.
fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you know what
So
I mean.
I mean, I don't
Like
want
they all treat them like they're
no,
a central organization. You know, which
yeah, I know. And so the thing is, so yeah, they're not a central organization. They are not a centralized organization.
yeah,
But from what I am aware, there are organized cells, quote unquote. I mean,
Yeah.
not like with hierarchies or
yeah.
dues, not like the Masons or anything. But
Oh,
but
Oh.
but yeah. So because like I mean, you see even online like yeah, like some of them have websites and some of them have merchandise. I just find that kind of funny. But
Yeah,
no,
it's
yeah,
like all the Twitter accounts,
yeah,
Antifa
I
of New
know. And
York.
so, however, I do think that a lot of them like are well intended, and I think that probably only, and don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily a fan of that particular method of protest that they support in particular. However, I do understand where they're coming from. I mean, I'm not talking about the looters in Minneapolis, but I'm again still talking about the anti-fascist movement right now. But the ones that you actually see at I'm trying to think of a good example. The ones who, when all the conservatives say, they're like, oh yeah, Antifa's just coming and attacking us and all that stuff. And while that does happen, I don't believe that it is a majority of them. I think it's just the ones that participate in black bloc tactics. Like for instance,
Yeah.
I have an acquaintance who I've been on several podcasts before in the past who identifies with Antifa, and she said that she said that she's essentially socially more of like a libertarian and an individualist, but in terms of like economics and stuff is essentially a socialist, but
Mhm.
does not
well,
believe in violent tactics. And she was talking on the episode of the podcast we were on about how the majority of them don't actually go out and do that. And I'm inclined to believe her. I personally like giving people the benefit of the doubt with what they say, unless I don't have a reason to do so. But I do think that they are a major boogeyman.
yeah, like, but when it comes to the good Antifa members, I can't help but see them as like, I can't help but see like the dichotomy of Antifa, like the dichotomy between Trotsky and Lenin. You know what I mean?
Oh, I completely
Was
agree.
well
I'm
intent
not.
or Trotsky was well intentioned, but he was still wrong.
No, yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I'm just saying, like, I understand where they're coming from. But what I do think it's kind of dumb that Trump labeled them as a
Yeah,
terrorist movement.
that's
That doesn't
hilarious.
make any sense. Like, I mean, I think that if anything, maybe a gang. like what they did with the Proud Boys,
Yeah.
but not a terrorist group.
No, they're just doing that. I mean, they're doing that so they can arrest anybody they want.
Oh yeah, no, totally. It's
so
like
they can arrest anybody that's not a Democrat or a Republican. You know, anybody that's on some extreme of some sort. You know, they're going to label an anarchist or an Antifa member so they can arrest them.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like when most people think of an anarchist, they essentially think of like a black bloc person.
Or they think of what's his name that killed Ferdinand and kicked off World War One. You know?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
Like that's what they think about. Like that's probably the most famous quote unquote anarchist in history.
Or yeah, and then even in U.S. history, I think there was a guy who killed McKinley, who was like super duper pro. I think he was like a union member. He was like he was essentially an anarcho-syndicalist, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the Unabomber, people think of him as an anarchist too, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's just extremist to the level of like killing people. You know?
Speaking of the Unabomber, that guy is very, I mean, I'm not like saying I do not like him. That guy was interesting as hell.
Oh, yeah.
He was like a Harvard professor of mathematics.
Oh, yeah.
Or something.
Mm-hmm. He was like in MK Ultra and all.
Like, how does that happen? Like, yeah.
But I mean,
he's like one of those people who is essentially he's in the society, but he's not of the society.
Yeah.
He lives in the society, but yeah.
But I mean, he was like an anarcho-syndicalist kind of environmentalist with like an environmentalist tinge to it, you know?
Yeah.
I've never read his manifesto, but I've read synopses of it, you know?
Yeah, I actually have never read either of them. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of scared too.
It might make sense to you.
I've heard that a lot of people say it does make sense.
I've heard the same thing. I've heard the same thing. So
I do not agree with it.
I like my air conditioning too much.
Yes.
I live in Texas.
My gasoline-powered vehicle.
He was basically an ANPRIM.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
what I was about to say, yeah.
So what do you guys think of this as an ideology? Techno-primitivism?
What?
Or primitivist futurism?
Is that like one of those? Wait, is that like one of those memes where it's like?
I guarantee you, there's some people out there.
Well, I remember what I ended up doing at one time is I don't know. I was just bored on Twitter, and Twitter is cancerous and sucks up hours of your time. I remember I made a list of just like the wackiest ideologies I could think of, and I think it was hold on, I wrote them down here. Okay, so number one, anarcho-fascism.
Right.
Yes,
of course.
I've heard of that one.
Yes.
Number two, monarcho-communism.
Okay.
Number three, techno-primitivism.
All right. Yeah.
The next one is actually something that could probably exist. Like I think they do have Bolshevik movements in like some Islamic countries. So yeah, that one doesn't make sense. Eco-corporatism. Ethno-globalism.
Ooh.
Okay.
No, that you could actually do that one. You just have to do a lot of genocide.
Yeah, you can make the argument that was essentially like, yeah, Hitler, of course, he was a national, like a hardcore nationalist, but at the same time, he wanted to take nationalism globally. He wanted to he wanted to make basically a global nation. So yeah, reactionary futurism or reactionary progressivism, maybe.
See, like when you said, what was it? Like what futuristic primitivism?
Yeah,
primitivist
futurism. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of the meme like where it's like on the moon and there are all these flying cars and there's this habitat and it's like if Cardi B had never released an album, like, you know, look how like all technology would be good. We'd be in like the 50s, you know, nuclear ideal of society.
Like Fallout, pre-Fallout.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, not Fallout 76 though. That we don't talk about that.
I've never played it.
Neither have I, but we still don't talk about it.
I've seen the videos.
Okay, so next, this one actually I am going to redact because this is totally possible. Democratic despotism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like Julius Caesar, that's essentially what it was.
Yeah.
When basically you get so much democracy that everyone essentially ends up electing a dictator that is an extension of the people's will. So,
Yeah.
okay, next, egalitarian feudalism. And then finally, this is a big contradiction. Nazi ethno-Zionism, aka Nazionism,
I like it.
which is like which is like literally impossible. It contradicts itself entirely.
I want to explore this idea.
Yeah, me too. Because it wouldn't last long.
It would not last long. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I hope that was not an offensive list.
Oh no, definitely
Yeah,
not.
but because I came up with that list ironically anyway. But yeah, back to the police brutality aspect.
Oh, that's right. We were talking about that.
I do think that yeah, I do think that it is not necessarily in all cases because you can't say 100% it's like this, but I do think that it has a history of being racially motivated. And I think I think what a likely cause is that in small town bumfuck Mississippi, it is more likely to be racially motivated, whereas in a larger northern city, it is more likely to be on an individual basis or making assumptions about somebody on an individual level, or like from the neighborhood they're from or socioeconomic status. I mean, of course, they're still linked to race because of the disproportionate amount of people from certain ethnic groups that live in lower socioeconomic areas. And across the board, no matter what ethnicities live in those socioeconomic neighborhoods, like neighborhoods of lower socioeconomic status, because they do not have access to the same institutions as people from higher socioeconomic statuses, that ultimately leads to fewer options in order to make a living. And so that unfortunately leads people gravitating towards crime. So I just think it's complete BS when people say, oh, blacks or Mexicans are criminals because that's just the way they are because of their race. It's like, no. All of this is downstream from economics.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think, yeah. I just all that dumb BS Stefan Molyneux stuff like that with that guy says, yeah, not a fan of that guy.
So
we are not a fan of Stefan Molyneux at this show.
Yeah, anarcho-fascism.
Okay, I wanted to give you a little bit of pushback on that, but I'm also going to give you a caveat. Now you said that you think that like police brutality, like in small towns, right, might be racially motivated, but
yeah,
in terms of like what we see, these videos that make their way online,
usually in larger cities,
they usually happen in larger cities. However, I'm going to give you a caveat in that, a lot of what we see is selective,
Yeah. And then it also even goes back to the Civil War or back during Reconstruction, because both people in the North and the South, there were a lot of racists in both of those places. However, the kind of racism was very different. For instance, in the South, it was more of a collectivist kind of racism. Like it's okay, yeah, the people racists in the South, it was they didn't like black people in general, or they thought they were inferior or whatever.
Right.
Whereas in the North, it was more of on an individual basis, because kind of like today, you have a lot of people who are they took the gerbs,
so individuals from the North
exactly
were racist, but not as a society, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like inherently racist in the South, or it was inherently racist, or there's definitely a lot of racism still down there, but
racism was taught, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was taught. Whereas in the North, it was more, on an individual basis, because especially people who were of lower socioeconomic status, and they felt like people who, like former slaves who were going north, they felt as if they were taking their jobs because they were willing to work for lower wages. And so then that led to a lot of the or like a lot of the racism in the larger industrial cities during the Reconstruction period. And then even up until after World War II, with the demographic shift, where you had whites living in inner city communities that were generally bourgeois. And then when you had like the flood of African Americans, and this is really around the time when Latin American immigration was starting to begin, they flee out to the suburbs then. And then it leads to that urban, I don't want to say paradigm shift, because it's not really the best way to demographic shift. Yeah, there we go. I don't know why I said paradigm, but yeah, I think it's all because of causality. It all goes back to it's cause and effect. This thing happens and this thing happens. And then the motivation, while it's always in a sense been racial, it's a different kind of racial motivation as opposed to how it was back during the days of like the slave trade, for instance.
Okay, y'all. It is.
But I think it is a lot of it is downstream from economics, and then people make that link between minority communities and just lower socioeconomic status. So people see something on the surface and assumes that these people are something else, when in reality, the only reason they are like this is because they do not have access to the same kind of institutions that people of higher economic status essentially have. And that's actually why I'm really pro charter school in the inner cities.
I agree completely, but it's time to take a break.
All right.
Thank you, buddy. All right, we're back from the break, and on the second half of the show, the Politicrat told me that he had a recent change in mind about policing, and that he has recently embraced private policing.
Oh, is that a cue for me?
Yeah, that's
yeah. What do you think about McDonald's? The police force.
The McPolice force.
McDonald's, it's disgusting, and my parents never took me there as a kid. But I eat there sometimes now because greasy food can be good once in a blue moon.
For a hangover.
Even for breakfast. However, apparently they stopped making hamburgers, cheeseburgers before like 9:30 or 10:30, which is kind of annoying if I want to get something on my way to work. But their fries, I like their fries and their sweet tea.
All right, cool. So what do you think about them having a private police force?
Do they have a private police force?
No, but they should, right? Like, you know, you may not be a libertarian, but you're like libertarian adjacent. So you have to believe that McDonald's has to have a police force, and Microsoft has to have a police force, and
you have to subscribe to your local. This is we're talking about.
I definitely think they should be able to have like their security. But when I talk about private policing, I mean something a little bit different than probably you guys do, because I know you guys are anarchists, and
right?
I still believe in like a smart amount of government. So
we're mainly referring to the objections to anarchy, right?
Yeah,
and then corporations will take over.
Oh, okay. Oh, is that okay? That's what you're.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a dig at me for what I said last time, right?
Oh, what are you referring to?
So the episode on the social contract.
I don't remember, man. That's been 18,000 years ago since we've done
I don't know. It seems like it was
everything has
yesterday.
changed.
No,
Everything has changed.
well, no, but we did that during the COVID, like at the height of the COVID.
Really?
And no, yeah, it was. This is back. I think it was like maybe April 16th, 17th ish.
Holy cow, man! That still feels like a million years ago.
Like 2 years, yeah, I mean about 2 months ago.
That's crazy.
So, but yeah, no, I mean it feels like I think I said this last time, but it seems like with the quarantine. Well, thankfully I'm not. Or I was on furloughed, but it seems like the COVID turns the hours into minutes, and the next thing you know, 12 hours have passed by. Yeah, it's kind of scary. Like I have this like inherent fear of the passing of time.
That's not a good fear to have.
No,
to be honest.
Like, no, I'm actually serious. Like, there's nothing that scares me more than clocks, with an exception of maybe spiders.
Wow.
But yeah,
fair
enough,
kind of, man.
That's a conversation for another time. But yeah, no. But in terms of private police, so up until recently, so I knew a lot of people who, in sort of the circles I've hung out in, who have always talked about private policing. And then, for instance, you guys know Tom Woods, right?
No, I've never heard of him.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, anyway, so Tom Woods.
That's a joke.
Yeah, I figured. I'm actually in his elite group. So.
Oh.
Wow.
I'm part of the Tom Woods elite.
On Facebook.
Yeah, on Facebook.
There you go.
because I donate to his podcast. No, but anyway, so he's had I think he had, who was it? Someone on. Well, he had like on about a year or two ago. I forget who it was, but they talked about private policing, and I was listening. I'm like, this makes no sense, because how is there going to be any like national consistency, and people are going to be like, oh yeah, no, that's illegitimate because they don't like the company or whatever. And so that's what I thought. And I realized it's a very skin deep way of looking at it now. Mm-hmm. Because the way I see it is, in terms of government, like in terms of like local government policing, that's essentially equivalent to if the government directly built the roads, like as in government employees built the roads.
Right, instead of contractors.
That's not what happens. They contract out private companies to basically do their bitch work for them. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking that is actually a potentially good way to, if we model policing after that, a good way to keep them accountable. And so after the George Floyd murder, because it was 100% a murder, I see, okay, so the cops are an extension of the government, and therefore they possess the legitimacy to pretty much do whatever I mean, I know it's not legitimate, morally speaking, but they can pretty much get away with anything because they have the monopoly on violence, which Max Weber, that was his definition of government. However, they are not beholden to anyone but themselves, and they can get away with doing whatever they do. And if they don't have cameras on or whatever, they can just make up lies about something that happened. Like, for instance, if the George Floyd murder was not recorded, they would have made something up, and they would have said, oh yeah, he tried to attack us, and so we found him like this. It's just some nonsense like that, and it almost makes you wonder how many times has that happened before?
Yeah. Oh, yes, so many times.
That is the disturbing thing to me. And so I was thinking, so very similar to how local governments contract out, like construction companies build the roads for them. Or for instance, my town, what we recently did is we got rid of the county garbage, the sanitation engineers, as they like to be called. The sanitation engineering was centrally controlled by the township. And then we ended up getting rid of that, and we ended up hiring out, contracting a private company. So a private company now takes care of it. They come more than once a week now, and they don't just come in the early morning. They come sort of more mid-morning. So you could actually get up if you oversleep, you can actually get up and still make it out there. And then instead of having to wait a whole nother week for them to come. And so like they work out the contract with the local government, the county, and they come up, they have conditions too that they present to the township. And they're like, okay, so if you want to hire us out for this amount, we have certain parameters that we would like the township to respect, like the trash now. Well, the trash and the garbage now come on the same day, which is good because it used to be Mondays for trash, Fridays for garbage. But now we are not allowed to put the trash bags in the recycling can. We have to pour out the recycling into the can, so there's no plastic bags. And in addition to that, we have to have like specific kind of cans for whatever reason, and then put them out in front of the curb, like I think a foot apart, something around like that. But it's like, okay, that's easy. That's easy enough to follow. It's not a burden, especially because of how more efficient it is now. And very similarly, I think a good idea for policing would be for law enforcement to act like that too. So you will have private firms, law enforcement, and then it's a very rigorous process to become an employee. Like instead of like a background check being the last thing that you have to do, like for instance in the modern policing system, they're basically like, okay, do this training for a couple years, do a background check last, that takes 10 minutes, welcome to the force. That's pretty much all it is. Mm-hmm. Whereas it would be way more rigorous to join, and because these companies would have an incentive to make sure that complete and utter sociopaths who just want to take their anger out on the world, so they don't become cops. Because I feel like that's mostly what bad cops are. They're essentially they were wimps who were pushed into lockers and like thrown into trash cans back in high school, and now they want to get back at the people who bullied them essentially. But so the companies would not want to hire these people, whereas the government, they want to get as many cops as possible essentially. And then but if the companies essentially vet these people, they will make sure that only the best people end up joining the force, psychological evaluations, make sure they're responsible. And then a county, what they can do is they can contract out one of these companies. And then the company will come, they will behave exactly how law enforcement behaves, but they will be beholden to the county itself. So as opposed to the cops essentially being the overlords that come and scare us, and that we constantly are in fear of, because I think everybody has an underlying wariness around the police. Like, I don't think that there is any doubt about that. I honestly don't know how somebody could not be cautious around the police, because right. They abuse their power all the time. However, with one of these firms that are contracted out to the towns, they will have an incentive to follow everything to the book, to not be bad cops, essentially. Because if they're bad cops, that will look bad on the company can get sued, because it's much easier to sue a private company than it is to sue the government.
Right, and they don't have qualified immunity.
And they'd lose the contract. And it would be much harder for them to find work after that. And then they'd have like a rating system probably. And very similar to if you have a construction company that completely fucks up a building that they're making, and it tumbles down, or some other random calamity happens, that construction company will lose their contract with the town, and they will go and seek out another construction company. So for instance, in this case, if the law enforcement firms, if the people working for the law enforcement firms are overstepping the bounds of their prerogatives, then they will lose the contract, the town will start looking for another police force. And then once they find the other police force, they will completely cut off, or they will cut off the contract officially with the one that they currently have. And then, so you guys probably won't like this part, but if the private company that loses the contract because they end up screwing up, because we don't want them to just leave the town right away, because then that could lead to some problems if they do that immediately. But part of the contract should be that if we fire you, you still have to stay until this other company comes.
Right. Well, yeah, you can put that in the contract. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Now, I don't have an issue with that.
okay, so yeah, I was thinking that maybe you guys would, because like maybe it would be like part of a government condition, and I know you guys are a fan of that kind of.
Well, for me personally, like I'm an anarchist, but I don't. I also consider myself a realist to a certain extent, which might upset a lot of anarchists. And I mean,
So you haven't gone full Rothbard.
no, I listen. I think ideologically, I am full Rothbard, and I think that in a perfect world, like if that were tried, I think it would work, like Rothbard's system. But I'm not sure that can be reached. And what I'm getting at is I think everything you've laid out so far is like my minimally accepted viewpoint on police.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the minimal amount that I'm willing to accept that I think would work for a decent amount of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm an incrementalist. Like, I mean, I'm a liberal in sort of the John Stuart Mill 19th century British Empire sense. But so that's me pragmatically. Yeah. But philosophically, I'm essentially a voluntarist. So I think maybe we should try to incrementally work towards as close to that model as possible, even though I don't think we'll ever reach that, because there will never be anything that will usher in utopia into this universe. These utopian dreams are static and life has changed. But anyway, I think that this model, especially because they will be beholden to, I don't want to say the will of the people, because that sounds a little iffy, but they will be employees of the town, employees of the people. They will be serving the people, not threatening them, essentially. And if they do that, they will have to stick to everything in the contract. And it basically incentivizes people to be good cops. That's the best way to put it.
Right. Okay.
And that's like the profit motive, essentially.
Yeah. So two things. I'm not as, I wouldn't describe myself as much of a pragmatist, but I do think that any way that you can make people's lives incrementally better, like I think you have to take that, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, however that may be. And in this case, like that's what you're talking about, is you don't have cops who run around without any, they can run around and they don't have, there's not going to be the consequences to their actions like you would have with a private police force, like you're talking about.
So because
and then secondly, I don't know if you guys have had time to look at the article that I linked to in the chat here, but in the UK, a few years ago, they contracted with a private police force that they arrested. This is a Daily Mail article from a couple years ago. 2018. They at that point they had caught 400 criminals and they had a 100% conviction rate. And I mean, I don't know, you know, what all the crimes were, you know, if there were some drug crimes that I don't agree with, but the point remains that they did have a 100% conviction rate, which shows that like that incentive structure was there.
Yeah, and that's actually why I don't think, and this is where we're definitely going to disagree. This is why I do not think that the courts should be privatized, because I feel like then that could lead to collaboration and collusion between the private companies and private courts, and they could essentially become one and the same, and then we'll be back right to square one again. There needs to be sort of a separation of power, so to speak, because I think there needs to be consistency in the justice system itself, not law enforcement. I think law enforcement, like I said, should be our employees. But you know what? I was actually thinking another interesting way to structure the private law enforcement could be to for different law enforcement agencies or private agencies to focus on different things. Like one of them might specialize in domestic violence. One of them might specialize in SWAT stuff. The other one might specialize in like basically being super troopers. All that, different prerogatives, different areas, and then the town will hire those individual firms to handle those specific things, so you don't have a single company coming and monopolizing all of the law enforcement in that municipality. So that is another possible way to do it. That might be a little trickier in terms of logistics.
To play devil's advocate real quick, one thing that you do see when you're talking about government contracting out to private companies is you do see some corruption, right?
No, yeah, I've definitely thought of that.
The good old boy system.
However, isn't that still preferable to what we have?
I mean, I would agree, but yeah, I mean, I just wanted to.
I can speak a bit on that. Being in Louisiana, which has like the biggest good old boy system in the country.
Oh God, yeah.
Where every government contract is given to somebody's brother or somebody's cousin, and it always fails. Like our roads are the worst in the country, and I mean because it always goes to somebody that somebody in the state government has their brother happens to own a contract company. And
isn't that because everybody is
get the contract?
Everybody's everybody's brother and sister and mother in like the deep south, though, right?
But I mean, like that's how it would work. Like, why wouldn't it work that way? Like, even if there was a public court system, and but there was a semi-privatized police, like you're putting forward, somebody in the court system that is tied into who's paying the bill for the privatized police. Like, why wouldn't, I don't see why they would be so altruistic not to give the contract to somebody they have special interest in, whether that is financially or through family or something similar.
Yeah, that is a fair devil's advocate argument, and that's one I actually never considered, but again, I think that's better than how it currently is, because
I agree. I agree with that.
At least there is the incentive to not be authoritarian shitheads. And well, the way the law enforcement, like the police system works, think of it. So to anybody who's listening who is like Catholic or high church Protestant or whatever. Well, mostly. So this is mostly a Catholic stereotype, but it works very similar to how it works with the church when you have a priest who diddles little children. They just get shuffled around quietly to a new parish.
Yeah.
Same with teachers who sleep with their children in public schools.
That's right.
They just get shuffled around to another school district.
I agree completely. And I had made that, like, I have somebody in my life that is very skeptical towards the Catholic Church. And I think alternatively, I made it to you Liberty Zero like through text or something. I said that like this cop situation is exactly the same as the Catholic Church.
So yeah, with police unions, for example, there is a major conflict of interest because, like what I was saying with the Catholic Church, just like a priest does something that is inappropriate with children, they get shuffled around to a different parish, and they have the 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 diocese. Yeah, the diocese is the one that handles that. Very similarly with police, they have the police unions, and if a cop does something bad, even if they're put on trial, the likelihood that they will actually be convicted, let alone convicted for murder, is exponentially low. And
Right. Well, everyone in the courtroom is a cop.
Because there is that relationship between the criminal justice system and law enforcement. For instance, you often have a lot of high-ranking cops who go on to be public prosecutors, and I don't know, sometimes even judges. Actually, although that's a little more rare. But there's that link between both criminal justice department, criminal justice system, and the police departments. And oftentimes people join the police departments just as a conduit so they could ultimately rise up and be part of the criminal justice system. Like, look at Kamala Harris, for example, who interestingly and hilariously earlier tweeted, "We need to demilitarize the police departments."
Yeah.
Which, does anybody believe that? Like, after all, like, I'm sorry, but just especially after that one debate, after she was called out, I mean, I never much cared for her to begin with, but I lost any inkling of respect that I may have had for her after that whole spat she had with Joe Biden. But yeah, I think there are very scary parallels between how the police department works and how church parishes work. And then, so, and while kind of moving on,
real quick, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, and while I do think that private policing, even in the context of like contracting with local governments and stuff, I think it's better than what we have now. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up like this country's history of private police, where you had companies like the Pinkertons and other such companies, where they would like literally get away with murder. So like,
I think that was because there was no oversight.
Well, real quick, let me finish my thought here. So like, for instance, in West Virginia, and a lot of this I'm getting from this episode I listened to from the Status Quo on the Battle of Blair Mountain. Mm-hmm. And basically these private security companies that got hired by the mining companies, they would like, so the mining companies, you know, you have the company store, that whole idea where these companies would own people basically, right? And
like in the South Park arc with the Amazon.
No, I'm not familiar with that, but
okay, never mind.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, basically,
pretty right. Much. And so when people would, for whatever reason, they would fall out of favor, they would do something that would really piss off the company. Maybe they, you know, run too much debt up, or you know, try to, you know, organize a union or whatever. These people would be like kicked into a slum town, and then just randomly these private companies would send a rail or a train through with these armed guards on the in the boxcars or whatever, and they just shoot at people as they went past
Well,
randomly.
I think the main difference between this, or what,
Well, real quick, let me finish up. I won't take that much longer. But in the several instances, and this is not just with the West Virginia stuff with the coal mining companies. This is just uh, in several different instances with like strikes and stuff like that. These private companies, they could go to court for what was definitely murder, right? And they would get off. Like, they'd have some people prosecuted, but like they would get off with murder.
I think one of the so I see what you're saying, but I think the main difference in this instance was I'm talking about, and the instance with like the Pinkertons and the West Virginia coal mining companies is that it was a coal mining company that hired these private security companies, or what would be the equivalent to a private security company today. Whereas this is a local municipality that would be hiring them out. So
right.
They are. So yeah. So it's not because. So there's not really going to be. There's not so much a risk of a merger, like a private merger between different companies. I mean, it's still you'll probably get a little cronyism, but they will never truly merge in the same way. And in addition to that, it might even not be such a bad idea. And so generally I'm pretty skeptical about like mass referendums and that sort of thing. Because, well, I mean, while I'm a fan of democracy, I'm not quite a fan of mass democracy. But perhaps just so there is more involvement between the townsfolk or people living in the county, and in terms of them having a decision and participation in deciding who these companies are going to be, maybe have a referendum, or not even a referendum, like an actual vote that makes the decision. So they will see the different options that they have for the companies, and they will be able to take a look at what the terms are, and the kind of get to know the kind of people who are in charge of it, and then they vote on which one that they want to have protecting them. And that could also even potentially forge a closer, like a tighter knit relationship between the police, or what would replace the police, and people living in the town. And they will definitely be more conscientious about what they do. And even police officers who aren't murderers, like that bastard who killed George Floyd, even they are very irresponsible a lot of the time and just want to do the easy thing to take care of a situation. And moving on to a good example of that. So yeah, while there is a disproportionate amount of police brutality towards African Americans, especially today, the next biggest demographic are people with mental illnesses. And as somebody who
Can you repeat
himself
that real quick?
has moved to like three
People with mental illness.
Okay.
This is something that I actually take kind of personally. Like there was I think this was 2015 or 2014, there was a boy, maybe about 19 or so.
I'm not hearing this. Do you?
No, he cut out.
Okay.
He didn't know what to do. So what his dad ended up
Wait. Can you start over real quick?
Oh, okay. Like from where?
You said there was a boy.
Oh, did you not hear what I?
Yeah, you cut out.
Okay. Did you hear what I was saying about like the mental health stuff?
Yeah, you said that after after black people, the second group was people with mental illnesses.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start from there. So let me see. So while it's true that black people, they are victims disproportionately of police brutality. The next largest demographic are people with mental illnesses, which is something I take very seriously as somebody who happens to have mood disorders. And I'm going to cite just one reference or one example. I think this was back in 2014 or 2015. I forget where it was, but it was in a pretty well off suburban community. And there was this boy who was still living with his parents. He was about maybe 18, 19, I forget the exact details, but I believe he had, I don't know for sure, but I think he had schizophrenia, like really bad schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, schizophrenia is bad and sad in general, but like apparently it was
It's on a spectrum.
Yeah, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it, and they were very tactful about it, and so they knew what was happening when it would happen, and so they wouldn't. The family made sure to tell them so there wouldn't be any issues. And apparently the neighborhood was pretty accepting and understandable. However, one night he ended up having a really bad episode, and they really couldn't calm him down. He wasn't. He didn't even have a history of violence, but they didn't know what to do. The dad freaked out and called the cops.
Yeah, I
Big
think I remember this one.
mistake. And so he was outside. He was kind of just like kind of, I don't know what he was doing. I think he was just running around the yard. He wasn't hurting anybody. He was yelling, running around the yard. Cop comes up, gets out of the car, goes over to the kid, says, "We don't have time for this," and shoots him in the head.
Holy shit.
Did not get charged. He was protected by his little cop buddies, and
Union.
Nothing became of that. They tried to sue the police department. Nothing came from that, and they lost their son because of that, because of cops. And so, while I think that there is, so I'm not going to outright say, because I know that a lot of people are of the opinion, like police, they're systemically racist. I'm not going to say whether I think they are one way or another, but regardless of whether they are or not, and I think this is something everybody can agree on, regardless of the position they take in terms of race, is that they are systemically violent and really have no regard for handling things appropriately. They just want to do the easiest solution because they want to get back to their precinct and continue sitting around eating donuts and drinking coffee and doing whatever other cop shit they like to do on their free time. I don't know. I just feel like they're really lazy. A lot of it is probably because there isn't a profit motive. That actually might be it. And they're just very careless in what they do, and they just want to go in guns a-blazing because that's the easiest way to take care of issues. And I think that's wrong, and I think if there is private policing, they will be forced to get more creative in how they handle things.
All right, yeah. So the final point that I wanted to make is that when I was let's see here, I'm trying to recall what I was talking about. Yeah. So the final point that I wanted to make is that I do think that having private courts would be preferable to what we have now, which is public courts. With the government, with government-run courts, right? And but before you were talking about how you thought the problem might be with you're talking about the security companies and the in these coal mining or whatever the companies that hire them with the problem with having that that merger, right? But I could I could foresee a scenario where you have a extremely large security company that can handle hundreds of these different contracts, right? And they'll have a lot of influence with government and in the justice system, right?
So why not make it smaller security companies? Like I think I was saying this earlier, where you have a different company that will specialize in a different aspect of law enforcement. Like you'll have one that focuses on domestic violence. You'll have one that focuses on like stuff the SWAT team does, which is definitely going to be the hardest one to keep in check. But another one that does like traffic tickets, so like the Super Troopers, essentially. You've seen that movie,
right? But you're still talking about like governments doing the hiring, right?
Yeah.
And you did you did say referendums, right? Like as that is having a possibility, right? So I mean, it could be possible that people make that choice, right? These small companies.
So because at least even though the town will pick a couple of them to choose from, they'll probably pick the ones that suit their interests the most. At least we would have some say in picking which one it is. And then we can look and see how large it is or what their background is, any controversies, so we can make an informed decision.
Yeah. At the same time, though, voters can be easily manipulated.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Right. To where
the plebiscite,
okay.
Collectively, the plebiscite are not necessarily the brightest of bolts.
Right. And, you see people now, with
Trump.
different issues, they'll call for the federal government, right? So I could see them saying like well, okay,
60% of Americans supported deploying the National Guard or something
right.
for this whole thing. Like that scares me, and it makes me think 60% of Americans do not deserve. 60% of Americans thereby do not deserve to vote, in my mind.
Yeah, well, and they don't deserve liberty, right?
Well, I mean, I think everybody does, but those who actually know.
But if you actively,
those who desire to trade liberty for security deserve neither.
Right. So
I completely I agree with that statement, with the ethos of it. But yeah, so I think that the only way that the private courts in that system would work would be like and personally I'm not pro decentralization to this extreme, but let's say you had like secession within communities and you had small communities that kind of did their own thing, which I'm sure you and Cotton are probably for.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that would only work, that would work like that, because you can't have a bunch of different private court companies under a single, or in a single nation that is under a single body politic, because there's going to be inconsistencies in terms of like the legal system, as opposed to a sort of flat, fair, across the board system based on, I don't know, like, hold on a second. Sorry, my computer froze up for a second.
That's all good, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there needs to be sort of a consistent jurisprudence in a civil society. And I feel like that each like private court, they kind of have their own way of doing like the same thing almost. However,
Well, okay, I was going to say that in terms of meting out justice in a fair or just way, what we have now, I would not consider as doing that effectively. In fact, obviously, in terms of prosecuting these different so-called crimes where there's no victim, et cetera, like we definitely don't see that. You see injustice in cases, for instance, like Ross Ulbricht, where he got sent to jail for creating a
Pirate Bay.
website and
Yeah.
right.
I'm not Pirate Bay, Silk Road.
Silk Road, yeah. But I do see. So you're talking about.
That's a brilliant business idea too. I'm just gonna say that.
Definitely, but I did want to, and I do want to say I'm not at all qualified to be talking about private courts and how that would work.
Yeah, neither am I. In terms of private police, I haven't even scraped the surface in terms of my knowledge on the exact inner workings of how it would hypothetically work. So,
right. I mean,
I think Rothbard wrote. Maybe I should read a little bit of what Rothbard wrote about it. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of Hop, from what I've read of him in terms of his idea of policing, he is on the right track. So I think I'm going to want to read maybe a little more of him too.
Yeah.
But
real quick, in terms of the private courts, I would say that you would see, as time went on, right? Not immediately, but as time went on, I think you would see a sort of a like common law, starting to form, where basically your courts are going to have an incentive structure that is based, like it'll have free market incentives, right?
Yeah.
And so the courts that are making fair rulings are going to be the ones that get hired, or they're the ones that are going to get used, right? And maybe you're not going to have some courts from the Northeast having making the same types of rulings with certain types of cases as what you might see in the Midwest. But in terms of that area, yeah, I do think that you would see like legal precedents being, or
what about hate? What if they like come up with something like hate speech laws or something, or trying to think of an example, or because the thing is, even though hate speech is an example of being a total dick, like anybody who uses quote unquote hate speech, or what we socially refer to it, is being a dick. However, that is one of the main reasons for the First Amendment, the right for people to be complete pieces of shit when they're talking, when they're using words. It's only until they get violent. Like, that is the whole point of free speech. You either have free speech or you don't have free speech. And what a lot of people don't realize is the Supreme Court does not recognize any such thing as hate speech. And while I am against quote unquote hate speech, on a moral level, I think that it is very problematic to actually make laws banning certain words, because then you have to consider that there are different contexts in which people say these things. And I just think that my biggest fear of that would be you'd have like private courts making certain things like laws that should not be laws, or that infringe on like people's rights. So I don't know. That's what, yeah. But I think the best place to start because we are not going to be able to go to the private law enforcement overnight.
Yeah.
I think what we need to start by doing is being more rigorous and conscientious with body cams, 100%. And so there are, I know you want to end this in a little bit, but there are two just more major points that I want to make.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the first is that the government, despite no matter how much people have been talking about this has been like the biggest discussion for the past, what is it now, 3 weeks? You've heard politicians talking about how shitty this is, how bad the system is, and how it needs to change, and then everyone's tweeting and saying stuff like giving like all this nice sounding rhetoric on TV. But what have they done to even try to fix the system? There are two things. Number one, on a national level, they started introducing what I like to call virtue signaling legislation.
Yeah.
So they recently, and I think it's a total waste of time that they did this, they voted on making a federal crime. It is already a crime.
Sorry, can you repeat that real quick? Making what a federal crime?
Lynching a federal crime, which is a complete waste of time. It is illegal in all 50 states, which means I know the point of making something a federal crime is so that if something happens in a state where something isn't a crime, then there could be federal overreach, and then they could come in and deliver the justice that needs to be delivered. However, there's no need for that to happen, because no matter what, somebody who lynches somebody in one state, in that state, will end up going on trial. Right. And on top of that, we have not in that's not to say that there aren't people out there who probably want to lynch people, and those people are evil. But no matter what, if they lynch somebody, they are going to go to jail no matter what. And that fear, ever since lynching became a hate crime in every state, I think it was like a little bit after. I don't know exactly when the last state to make it illegal was, or to make it a hate crime. But there hasn't even been a lynching in about 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And that is, yeah. And because because it was made, like I said, it was made a hate crime, and generally hate crimes, because of the difference in motivation. Well, I personally don't think that motivation should affect what the sentence is, because I'm a consequentialist. So I think that no matter who you do something to, the motivation, the deontological motivation doesn't matter. What matters is that you did it, and that you killed another human being, or that you raped another human being, or that you, yeah.
That's something that I beat the drum, like I haven't done it on the podcast, but yeah, I've had that conversation several times where I forget, I think I was doing some research in college about it, about some hate crime bill. Yeah. And I was reading it, and I realized, like, well, this is stupid. Like, like you just said, it doesn't matter.
I know it's well intended, but it is a waste of time.
I don't even think it was well intended. Like, it's just like you're saying, it's virtue signaling. Like,
because it almost makes me wonder: do they actually want to change anything? Or
no, they want to be able to say, "Hey, I signed off. I sponsored this hate crime bill." Oh, what's a hate crime? Oh, well, it's when you commit an actual crime, but you actually had like mean intentions in your heart. You did it because you don't like somebody.
Is still dead. I mean, there are so many different things that motivate you. Like, I think that. I mean, is there such thing as a love crime?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, yeah. I don't care if you're beating me with hate in your heart, or whether you're completely indifferent. I don't want to get beaten.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not somebody of color, so I don't know, and I will never know what it is like to be discriminated because of, or on that or discriminated against
in that way. Basis. Yeah.
But either way, I think everybody feels, or I assume that everybody feels the same way when the same thing is happening to them, at least in the moment, no matter who the person is. Like, I mean, even I'd still be upset if my best friend punched me, and as somebody wanted to rob me, or somebody who hated me punched me, because it's not nice to get punched. It does not feel very nice.
Right.
However, you're probably more likely to present the other person who's not your friend, because you and a friend are probably punching each other for bullshit reasons. But so, and then another piece of virtue signal legislation is actually going on in my state right now. And so I live in Virginia. And so remember back in Virginia, back in, what was it? I think 2017. Yeah, August, I think it was like August 14th, 2017. There was they were going to take down the Robert E. Lee statue in, it was Lee Park, sort of near UVA. And I actually have a couple friends who went to UVA. But they wanted to take down the statue. And so I'm not necessarily against taking down the statue. No, so I'm not going to defend the statue, but I'm also not going to defend taking down the statue because that's not the point that I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. But so they took down, or they were going to take down the statue. No, I think they weren't even going to take down the statue. They were just going to change the name to Emancipation Park. And people talked about the potential of also moving the statue. But then you get that there's this stupid Nazis coming in and doing their blood and soil. They won't replace us. The Jews won't replace us. Just all that stupid, vapid nonsense. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, they have their little party down near the statue, and then we know what happened there. A protester was killed by some shithead driving a car into the crowd. And that must suck because I know what it feels like to get run over by a car. It is not fun, but I was fortunate enough to survive. But so you know how we saw that so much chaos? It almost makes me wonder if legislation to take down the statue, if that will happen again, maybe. And so I actually understand both sides of the argument there. Like, yeah, you have people on the right who are like, oh, it's history. As a history buff, I completely get that argument. Yet on the other hand, I think yet at the same time that having the statue there is celebrating essentially an armed rebellion against the country that we are all citizens of. And I think Abraham Lincoln, there are definitely criticisms to be made of him. I think you and I could definitely agree on that. Mm. However, it's the Confederates, I think, or I know, morally speaking, the Union had nothing on them. Like, I'm sorry, the Union had nothing on them. And I don't know how many, or if there are any, Southern apologists who listen to this podcast or not.
Oh, probably. But
yeah, because I know there are a couple people who use certain ideologies as an excuse to believe certain things. Because
I personally believe that for the South, it was definitely they wanted to preserve slavery.
Right? Oh yeah,
I don't think that until the end of the war, the North cared about ending slavery.
Didn't. No, because plus you also see, a lot of the abolitionists, they wanted to repatriate them all to
Africa, and then you get Liberia after the war. Yeah,
in the book by Harriet Beecher, was it Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin? I think
yes,
so. Yeah. So, and she actually did a great job in the book of displaying the racism and the anti-racism that existed on both sides. Like, I think you had what was it? There was this one character. She was like a middle-aged woman, and she was like a hardcore abolitionist. But she was also talking about how, the slaves, they're a different color. They don't belong in our society. All that stuff. We need to move them. But I really feel for them because nobody should be enslaved. That's definitely racism.
Yeah.
And then you also have the people. You have Legree, who's the main bad guy, who comes in at the end, and he's the one who's torturing Tom. And what's interesting is also he was what's the reverse of a carpetbagger again? They come from the north. He basically came from the north and became a Southerner. Mm-hmm. And so it shows kind of the nuance of racism on both sides. And then you had the little girl. Was it? It was some I think biblical name or something. Or no, was it? No, it wasn't biblical. It was like Ava or something. And then how she was from the South. She was very pro-abolishing slaves, and then she managed to convince her father. But then you had the father's brother, who was a hardcore slave owner who from the South. And so it just shows that that racism is a problem that is not confined to any one particular area, and is just like a problem in general.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that's the depressing. Here's the depressing thing: I don't think that we will ever 100% get rid of racism until we end up meeting aliens. But even then, all of that racism is going to be redistributed onto them, because we'll finally figure out, oh shit, we're actually all one people. We're not alone in the universe. We're scared of these guys, and then that anxiety will essentially bring everyone together. But is that a good thing? Is that really getting rid of racism though, or is it just moving the racism to be concentrated and focused on a different area? And so, in terms of the back to the statues, for instance, it's like, yeah, okay, you want to move the statues. I think that like the intent behind it is noble. However,
yeah, you can see both sides on that.
But how is that solving? Like, and I'm not even particularly against it anymore. Like, I mean, I used to be more skeptical, but then I actually started getting educated and learning about how, like the pain it causes some people. And I'd actually see, here's a good analogy. You know, Erwin Rommel, right? Back during World War II.
Right.
So he was apparently a very noble person, and he was not, he did not have a history of anti-Semitism, but he still fought on the wrong side.
Yeah.
There is a reason that there are no statues in Germany dedicated to Erwin Rommel. And a lot of these Confederate statues were actually not built until the early to mid 1900s.
Yeah, it was like during the civil rights era.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite a few of them, yeah.
And so, plus then you also need to consider that founding fathers never wanted any and of course, the founding fathers were definitely better people than Confederates, but the founding fathers did not want statues built of them. Yet over time, we started hailing them as gods.
Yeah.
And if you go to the Capitol,
you have to build up that mythology.
The Capitol building, they're depicted as Olympians in the rotunda.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, it is both glorious and terrifying. And then the thing is, it's actually a sign of a civilization in decline when societies start building giant statues and glorifying their ancestors. And so it's kind of interesting how they do that. And then you also have, so in contrast to, I'm going to talk about two Robert E. Lee statues real quick. There's the one in Lee Park, or Emancipation Park now, I think it's called, in Virginia. And then there was one, which back up until I think 2015, was in Louisiana. So the presence of a Robert E. Lee statue in Virginia at least makes sense logically, but there is no logical reason for a Robert E. Lee statue to be in Louisiana. Robert E. Lee didn't even ever he never went to Louisiana, not even during the war. He did not campaign there. Why? It just seems really suspicious to me. And I think you could compare Robert E. Lee to Rommel in a lot of ways, because he was seen and even regarded by Northerners, including Abe Lincoln, because what's kind of funny is they even stayed friends and sent correspondence with each other and even went to dinner with one another during the war, which is kind of funny.
Wait, really? I didn't know about that. No,
Grant, I believe Grant and Robert E. Lee, they dined together several times.
Oh, wow.
No,
yeah, you don't hear that part.
Yeah. No, so Lee was apparent. So I've never met Robert E. Lee, and I don't think I ever. Something tells me I probably never will. But so as history has told us that he was apparently not a bad person, but that doesn't change the fact that he still fought on the wrong side. I don't think we should be glorifying anyone who's fought on the wrong side. But my solution to solving this would be for every town, like if there's a Confederate statue in a town, referendum, if the people want to keep their stupid statue and they vote on it, like if there's like a large amount of the population who are obsessed with the statue, it's just like, if they vote on it and they want to keep it, just let's not cause any trouble.
Yeah,
I think it's fair for communities to decide how their communities will look and what their communities stand for.
Hmm.
Even if they, I mean, their communities might stand for something shitty because they do, then I'll probably think less of them for wanting to do that. But it's just, I don't like the principle of, for instance, you'll have a state government coming around and saying something like, okay, we're going to move like all these stupid statues. You guys don't have a say in it. Even the towns that 100% want the statue there. I mean, it's their town. So I think the fairest thing would be to let towns vote. I know my town, my town has a Confederate statue um, right out front of the courthouse. And I'm sure my community, we live in Northern Virginia, I'm sure if my community voted, they would probably vote to take it down and move it to a museum. And if that is the will of the town, then that is how it should be. And I think that that's what they should do in Charlottesville. And I am confident, I'm actually very confident because of the whole white nationalist rally back in 2017, that they will probably vote to move the statue to a museum. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I pollution because you're not erasing history, but you're putting it into context and you're also being like sensitive about it. So, but what the governor is doing, even if he is the ethos of what he is trying to do with saying we're going to move the statue, well, I think it should be the town that does it. But I do think that it's maybe coming from a good place, and the end result that he wants is, morally speaking, the best outcome. However, the two problems with that are, number one, I think we should give it up to a vote for the town, because those are the people who actually live around the statue. And number two, do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just checking. And number two, what is that doing exactly to solve police brutality? It almost, so, and again, while I think,
like you said, going back to virtue signaling.
Yeah. So, and while I think that it's definitely, the action itself is definitely, in terms of outcome, is not as useless as the making lynching a federal hate crime when it is already a hate crime in every state. I don't think it's as useless as that, because at least that has an outcome that will be different. Like, you know what I mean when I say that, right? Like, at least that will have an outcome, but it still does not solve the problem itself, because the problem is at its heart police brutality. And while I do know that Black people are disproportionately affected by it, and I think that that is one of the saddest truths that our society faces right now, they are not the only ones who are victims of police brutality. So I think what we need to do is we should expand the focus to police brutality in general. Like, of course, we should still talk about the racial aspect of it, but I think the heart of the issue, what we need to do, not necessarily, I mean, yeah, we should still, quote unquote, tackle racism, but the racial aspect is not the heart of the issue on a fundamental level. It is the police brutality that affects, for instance, African Americans, Mexican Americans, the mentally ill, it's just, and sometimes just even random bystanders who get their houses accidentally broken into.
Well, okay, real quick, let me insert something in here real quick that I just it kind of just occurred to me. Yeah, so you have these different solutions, right? That you were saying, like you're saying, they don't really fix anything, right? And in fact, when you're talking about, okay, we're making this about race, we're talking about taking down these Confederate statues that, you know, like it or not, some people care about that. Well,
yeah, and I understand their argument. I don't necessarily agree, but I understand where they're coming from.
Right. Well, these are divisive issues, right? And
very divisive, yes.
And it occurs to me that, like, it's purposely divisive, right? You have Abraham Lincoln saying, "A house divided cannot stand." Well, yes and no, right? uh a nation, right, a people group, like they can't unify if they're constantly, if the state, right, because that's it's not the same thing. A country and a state, they're not the same thing. If the state keeps them divided, the state can, that's the, like, they can stay healthy, right? You have divided people that, like, they're not going to stand up to the state if they're divided, right?
Yeah.
And so you see all these solutions that the state's coming up with, they're not actual solutions, right? These aren't good faith
Boy, everyone
solutions.
should go out and probably consider buying a gun.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. At this point, like, yeah, I think gun violence, yeah, it's an issue. However, at the same time, what are you going to do in a situation like, even if you, like, you might think that it's like if you buy insurance, if you don't buy insurance, you're like, oh, I don't think this will ever happen to me. But what if in the chance that it does, you're screwed? And so I'm not really big. I'm not part of like the gun culture or anything. I'm not a gun nut. I don't go around wearing like NRA shirt. I don't even have a gun. Yeah. But at the same time,
well, the NRA sucks. So
NRA is terrible. I just think they're absolute garbage.
Total trash.
But yeah. But anyway, I think that it's definitely something to consider, because what if a cop breaks into your house without a warrant, or you're walking down the street and something similar to George Floyd is about to happen to you and you see it coming? Or if there's just some guy who comes and wants to like attack you, something like that.
It's at the point.
What is a gun-free zone going to do? It's like, oh, do you think somebody's going to be like, oh crap, it's a gun-free zone, damn it, and it's not going to go? There was actually, I think, an SNL skit about that like years ago.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
But like on your point, with your point about the cops, this whole episode's about police brutality, right? Yeah. But you have these cops, they'll do these no-knock raids, right? And it's at the point, we've seen enough people that get killed that they're not even resisting, right? This actually is very related to the very last point I wanted to make also. Well, okay, yeah. But I want to hear what you have to say too. So. Right. Well, it gets to that point where you have to ask yourself, if a cop comes through my door, right, and I know it's a cop. Well, am I screwed either way if I resist or don't? Because if you're in the dark or the cops, you can't guarantee. They always go for the dog first. Yeah, and you cannot guarantee that they're not going to shoot you, or brutalize you and your family. And you have to. It's something that you have to think about, at least in my mind. Like, hey, if the cops come through my door, the conservatives will say, well, you should have just complied. Well, no, that's not always how it works. There's George Floyd was like murdered. He was murdered, and he was not resisting to any level that required that level of force at all. Did not have a heart. These cops did not. None of them. Like, he was literally calling for his mother. Yeah, when these guys get psyched up, they get psyched up when they get in these situations. And then they just stood around and, okay, honestly, I know this sounds kind of radical, but I'm just going to outright say it because this makes me so mad. That's what this podcast is about, man. If I were one of those cops, I would have shot that other cop dead. Wouldn't have cared what would have happened to me, but that would have been the right thing to do. Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, once you start murdering somebody, you're pretty much already a murderer. Yeah, right. And, that's something that I thought about, right? Is like, okay, if I'm in that group of people that's filming George Floyd being murdered, right? And at least I'd go through my life in prison knowing that I did something right. Oh, I mean, with the four of them there, like, you'd probably be dead. But like, I mean, that's something that I'm like, I'm hoping that I'm the guy that, if I'm not, like, if I don't use lethal force, then, if I don't use lethal force, at least, you're trying to tackle the guy, right? And that's why you have to hope that you're that person that's going to act.
That's why I think with again, not the protesters, but the people who are actually rioting, or not even the rioters necessarily, but the people who are looting or the people
Right.
who are burning down buildings. So it almost what they're doing is they are attacking and burning down buildings of people who have nothing to do with this. I think that's very wrong, and a lot of them.
Yeah.
So there was this one guy, a retired firefighter. He always wanted to open up a restaurant. Finally opens up his restaurant, his entire life savings, and then COVID happens. So he has to delay his grand opening, and then this happens. He gets his entire restaurant burned down. People didn't. This was also a person of color. He was black.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the entire restaurant gets burned down. And when he's cleaning up the debris, some assholes come and steal his safe. That is just like
that's what makes me mad.
Do you know what? So if they're actually going to make a statement, they should burn down police stations. They should swarm and attack cops.
They did that to one, but I mean, the vast majority of the destruction was done to people that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I could sympathize with the protest. I can sympathize with the looters too. I mean, I want a new laptop. I want a new laptop, but am I going to go out and do that? No, because you're stealing somebody else's property, and property, whether you like it or not, is still it's an extension of your labor.
Yeah.
It's an extension of what you do. And so what's interesting is, so this also ties this back to the, like the whole breaking and entering with cops, and then also the what we were talking about with the virtue signaling legislation. So what's interesting, okay, so I'm going to outright say I have never been more disappointed in a single politician in my life than I have been with Rand Paul.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's just went off the deep end and went into total Trump territory.
Well, but did
However,
you?
I know that's what I'm getting to.
Okay.
I think we both
Yeah.
know where I'm going. So he, so in my opinion, he's what I'd say. So I think he's pretty shitty, but he's not as shitty as every other Republican in.
He's the best senator.
And then, so what happened was, so he ended up voting present on the on the federal hate crime thing. People gave him so much shit for it. Even Cory Booker, who he's had like a bromance with for years, because they're very they agree on civil liberties and foreign policy and stuff. And surprisingly, Cory Booker is actually the most pro free market Democrat that there is in the Senate. But so what he ended up doing, or Rand Paul, what he ended up doing was, after he got all that shit, he introduced legislation that was, what was it again? I forget exactly what it was, but it had to do with cops breaking,
no more
non-warranted
no knock raids.
Yeah. So,
and it's called the Breonna Taylor Act, I think, or something. Yeah.
And so because of that, I've gained a little more respect for him. That is the kind of legislation that we need. That is actually the kind of action that we need. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous that is not what we're focusing on. And yeah, okay, it's like the virtue signal legislation might look nice on the surface, and it might make people feel more comfortable. And okay, that's fine. It might be symbolic, as the federal hate crime one was, but it's not solving the root of the problem. And I've been reading Malcolm X's ever since this thing happened.
That guy was pretty woke.
Oh yeah, I bought Malcolm X's his autobiography, and honestly, I like him more than Martin Luther King at this point. I think he makes a lot more sense.
Well, Martin Luther King was a communist.
No, he wasn't a communist, but I liked his his peaceful protest type thing. However, I think Malcolm X definitely, philosophically speaking, was a lot better in terms of, especially because of his stance on defending your property and believing that that's Black communities need to be the ones to own the businesses. They need to then guns too. He was very pro Second Amendment.
Yeah.
And he was also, his favorite book was also my favorite book, believe it or not. And I was super excited to find that out.
What is it?
The Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler.
Okay.
Greatest history book ever written, in my opinion. Well, along with Arnold Toynbee's A Study of History. And if for whatever reason, what I think, if any of my coworkers end up listening to this, I'm still debating whether or not I'm actually going to post this on Facebook because of the controversial nature of this topic. And people, you never know when your words are going to get taken out of context.
Yeah.
But in the case that I do have any coworkers who listen to this, or at least listen to this episode because I'm on it, they're probably going to crack up after I mentioned Decline of the West because I'm literally, I work at a bookstore and everyone like makes fun of me for always bringing that book up and always recommending it to people because it's like, it's a book from 1917. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and it's a really weird book too, but I'm not going to get into that because this is not about the decline of the West. However, I feel like these issues are definitely linked to the real decline of the West. With the COVID and the all the other stuff going on right now, and then secession in what is it, Seattle?
Yeah, jazz.
Yeah, but so the last thing I do want to say is, in terms of public police, they think that they're the be all end all. I mean, the be all end all of making decisions. But it seems like that the rules that are written for them to follow, they just treat them like guidelines, because there's really no one to stop them. Like there's no one has not even the town really has any actual authority over them.
Right.
And so they can pretty much do whatever they want, get away with it, and say whatever they want because everyone's going to believe them. And history,
the courts are in their favor.
And history, as Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "What is history than just a set of lies agreed upon by men?" History is written by the strong, by the victors. The cop is almost all the time going to be the victor.
Right.
And I've come to the point where I view modern law enforcement. So I like I said, I view it on an individual level. I think there are good cops. I've met good cops.
Yeah.
I'm not being a bootlicker here. I mean, as individual, I judge cops on how appropriately and how nobly they handle their responsibilities. And I think there are a lot of them out there, but it's an individual basis. It's not an institutional basis. I think the institution itself is rotten to the core. And
it's like going back to what you're saying about Rommel, right? You disagree with his job, but was he a bad person?
Yeah, exactly.
Not necessarily.
And
he made the wrong decision. He shouldn't have been doing what he was doing.
Yeah, and I do think there are cops who do follow who handle themselves well and actually do follow things to the book and are fair. However, that definitely does not represent the probably not even the majority. Honestly, I've lost any. I mean, as the author of the aforementioned book that I cited once said, "Optimism is cowardice." I have since lost any optimism that most police officers are good people and handle themselves well. However, I do think that there are many individual cops who are good people and are even good cops. And once we move towards a private policing, those are the people who I'd want in the private security companies that would be contracted out.
Yeah.
And what I find really ironic about this whole thing is, so you have Republicans who for years, like conservatives in general, who for years have been talking about, oh, we need to privatize everything. Let's privatize Amtrak. Let's privatize healthcare, or let's privatize Social Security. Let's privatize Medicare, Medicaid. Let's privatize whatever, like all these government services.
Mm-hmm.
I have never once heard any conservatives say, let's privatize law enforcement.
Yeah, and they love the FBI.
Silent. Yeah, exactly. They're silent. completely 100% silent on this issue. And it just goes to show how they are inconsistent hacks on certain issues. They are not consistent, and it's ridiculous. But so I'm going to close, like, at least my part, unless you have anything else you want to talk about, because I can be here for as long as you want.
We I think we have a pretty long episode at this point.
Yeah, we do. So I will close by saying this, and again, this is also related to what we were talking about with cops, basically cops breaking and entering. Like, let's face it, that's what it is. So Thomas Aquinas once said, "A king who is unfaithful to his duty forfeits his claim to obedience. It is not rebellion to depose him, for he is himself a rebel, for whom the nation has a right to put down and thus physically remove from his office." So he's basically saying a king who works against his nation's best interest is not a legitimate king, and therefore must be replaced. I think we can use the same argument with cops. You know what? A cop who breaks into your house without a warrant, as far as I see it, they are no longer a cop. They are a home invader who is wearing a police uniform. That is all they are. And because they are overstepping the bounds of the prerogatives that are given to them by the law itself, that are enshrined into law, because they are overstepping the bounds of what they were told they can and can't do, I think that you reserve every right to defend yourself. And it is even the moral thing to do with him as you wish, whether it is maiming him, whether it is shooting him in the kneecaps, whether it is killing him. He is harming you, and he should not be viewed as a police officer, because he is not. He's illegitimate at that point. And I think the same goes for police brutality, home invasion, or anything that is violent. Now, I don't think you should go out and kill cops like randomly. I think that is equally as immoral. But you get to a level, we are all human beings. We all have the same natural rights. Just because somebody is wearing a police uniform, that does not mean that they are morally worth more than you.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you did nothing wrong and they are trying to overpower you or do something, you have your right as a human to defend yourself.
Yep.
Because you have done nothing wrong. If you've done something wrong, then I do think that you deserve to be like locked up, and that is a legitimate responsibility of like a police officer to do. However, if you didn't do anything wrong and this person is aggressing against you, it's just another human being who's coming to attack you. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And this is an issue I'm very passionate about, especially from the mental health perspective, because personally that's the only one I can really relate to, because I'll never be able to relate to, like, I am never going to be a black person.
Yeah. or
I am
a
never
couple
going
white
to be
guys
a black
here.
person. Yeah. And so they experience it differently. Everyone experiences, everyone who has experienced police brutality, not even like both on a demographic level and within that demographic level on a personal level as well. Everyone who has experienced police brutality has the same thing in common. Even if they experience it in different ways, they're all experiencing police brutality.
Yeah.
And that is why this issue needs to be collectively, like all these different advocate communities like Black Lives Matter, like mental health advocacy groups, ANCAPs, just all these movements that actually care about this and who are against police brutality, pro-peace, pro-dignity, pro-liberty, or pro-equality, or pro-liberty and pro-equality, just all of these things. The one thing that can unite all these coalitions is a desire to change the system, a desire to abolish the criminal justice department as it exists, and to reform it into something that works as it is supposed to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you don't have to agree on everything, but like you said, if you can agree on this issue, and I'm not a political solutions guy, but you know, if you can figure out a way to where individuals like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Duncan Lemp aren't being murdered.
Yeah. What about that other guy who was like at the construction site?
Construction site.
Wasn't there the guy? It was back in maybe like, was it like Armory something? I don't know.
Man, it
I don't know,
I
but he was
probably,
like,
you're not.
and then these people were like, these two men were stalking him because they thought that he was like breaking in.
Oh,
And then
yeah, Arbery.
And then they called the cops, and the cops just ended up shooting him.
Yeah, Ahmaud Arbery.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, except it wasn't cops.
From,
it was actually a couple. It was a former. I don't know if he was a former cop, but he used to work.
Well, he
may have been a former cop. I don't know.
He's a wannabe vigilante. All murderers are murderers. I don't think that.
Yeah.
I mean, a cop who murders somebody is a human who's murdered. It's the same thing as a I don't know, as a plumber who murders somebody.
Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, because like what I said earlier, a cop who murders somebody is, in my eyes, no longer a cop, and they're just a murderer in a cop's uniform.
Yeah. Well, you have to think in terms of individuals, and you have to, as much as you can, you have to reject that collectivist mindset. And and I think that's a good place to stop it here. Cotton could not continue with the recording. He dropped. He was having all sorts of technical issues tonight.
Wasn't he? Did he say that his computer was frozen, or did he say did he say he was? Because it almost sounded like, when I vaguely heard him, it almost said, the first time it sounded like he said, "I'm going to go watch Frozen."
Well, that wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. That's typical Cotton, just abandoning the interview, halfway to go watch Frozen. Sounds like him.
That sounds like a good way to spend the night,
Or cracking open an IPA, watching Frozen. That's Cotton. All right, but hey, it was it was good talking to you, man. I'm really happy with the interview or the discussion that we had here.
Went a lot better than last time, I think. Not that last time wasn't good content; it was just all the technical difficulties and stuff.
Yeah,
I still haven't listened to that last one yet. No.
That's a trademark here at Dissecting Liberty is technical difficulties. We
at least that's a good gimmick to set us apart from or set you guys. I'm not part of that, but
you are our most frequent guest.
It's been a good topic, good conversation. I think we've laughed, we've cried, we've gotten angry.
That's how it is when you're in fringe politics, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty milquetoast.
You're getting there, man. You're getting there.
Well, I'm trying
5 months from now, we're gonna be talking about I don't know, some anarchist position that you now have.
I don't know. I think
you've moved to private policing, so I'm just saying it's a matter of time.
It's what was it? I forget. It was like a quote. It was like, "What's the difference between an anarchist and a minarchist?" About 6 months.
6 months, man.
I don't know. I think the closest to anarchism that I'd ever get to would probably be like a Nazikian night watchman state. But the only difference would be the private police, because Nozick was for public police, but this would be putting private police in its place. Yeah. So basically 1/3 less of what Nozick believed.
Well, hey, I would take that. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And we're not going to be able to do our typical outro since Cotton abandoned us to watch Frozen. But thanks for joining us, everyone. thank you, Politicrat, our favorite statist here on Dissecting Liberty. And yeah, I'm gonna go. Yeah, just I'm terrible at yeah. I didn't think this outro through, but anyway, we appreciate it. We had a great conversation, and I definitely think we'll have you on again.
All right. I look forward to it. Just as I said last time, don't know what the topic's going to be, but it'll definitely be a topic.
Yeah. All right, man. Good talking to you.
You as well.